Hello everyone, it is TooAwesome here with another video. Now, WandaVision has recently wrapped itself up, and since we haven't gotten all that much from Marvel recently, I thought it would be fun to go over and review Marvel's most recent project, WandaVision. Letting you guys all know, there will be spoilers later in the video, but I will give you a warning before that, so don't worry. But now that we got that all out of the way, let's review WandaVision. WandaVision! WandaVision is a 9-episode romance mystery drama science fiction show which premiered exclusively on Disney+. Now, going into WandaVision, my expectations were on the floor. Initially, I just wasn't all too excited for the show since Wanda and Vision have never been favorites of mine. Even in the comics I've read, they always just felt bland to me. So I ended up putting off this show for weeks, which eventually played into my favor since I got to watch a bunch of episodes back to back without cliffhangers, but I'll speak more on that later. But after weeks of my friends pestering me to watch the show and not having anything I immediately had to watch, I gave it a shot, and well, it was really good. Plus, it was kind of funny. It didn't have me slapping my knee and gasping for air, but there was humor that made me crack a smile or two, and even got me to sharply exhale. Because to begin with, I really liked all the small gags and special effects. They really played into the whole sitcom idea and went along with the time period quite well. And they did not shy away either. They went all in. Even the fake commercials with the obvious clunky cuts and fades played into the time period as well. And well, for instance, the plates would change in the middle of a commercial for food, and it was little things like that that cracked me up. It made me feel good for noticing, and even if it was a fake mistake, it still felt good to catch. Maybe my humor is lame, but the intended issues were very funny to me. And I love the references made in these fake commercials. The Stark Industries or Hydra products, while being minor and insignificant, made me feel good and accomplished for picking them out, and I feel like that's how you tie something into a bigger universe. Dropping little Easter eggs like that makes a person feel good if they recognize it, because it's almost a reward of sorts for watching everything else. I will say though, the show is a little unsettling and by far the scariest idea Marvel has toyed with. Even on episode 1, you get this scene almost breaking the fourth wall as the characters get visibly more scared and disturbed, almost as if things aren't going according to plan. Even writing this part of the script gave me chills and had me checking my shoulder. Maybe it's just a personal thing, but I think this is the scariest idea Marvel has worked on. Like, what is alluded to is genuinely my worst nightmare, but I digress. You get even more of these hints throughout the show, and it all allows you to piece together what you believe the story to be about. And this is where I think the show is at its best. I myself am not the biggest fan of sitcoms, but the show had me invested in so many others as well. I started seeing all these fan theories flying around, and even my friends and I started toying with certain ideas. But this leads me into my issues with the show. I can't talk about them without mentioning spoilers. If you want to avoid the spoilers, then skip to the time on screen. Okay, hopefully everyone is gone. The issues for me started to really arise when Agatha was revealed as the big bad villain. Now personally, I don't mind this. Do I think there was a better way to handle things? Absolutely. But since she entered the story, I don't really mind. However, what she led up to, I have issues with. But let me start with the good first. First of all, she allowed for the audience to understand and experience more of Wanda and Pedro's backstory. That's amazing because I always found it weird how such a core person to Marvel, especially going forward after Endgame, basically had little to no past or explanation. All the information we had previously given were little tidbits here and there in passing, so it's great to actually get a dedicated backstory and an origin story. Also, like I said before, I don't mind Agatha being introduced into the story, and at first, it only fed into more fan theories between me and my friends, and I especially love when a show relates their lore back to real world events. This isn't in particular to WandaVision, oh no, just in general I think it's great. Say for instance in Beyblade lore when Moses parts the Red Sea with a Beyblade, pretty cool stuff if you ask me, and I even dare you to tell me otherwise in the comments, because let's be real, that stuff is dope. It's dope. It's so cool. So linking it to the Salem witch trials was not something I expected, and it opens a lot of possibilities in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that would probably be otherwise untouched. It just does so much for me in the sake of world building and adds so much more depth to it in my eyes. However, that's where the good stops, because eventually Agatha's reveal ends up becoming a tool to force some of the dumbest, stereotypical superhero movie tropes. Because being real, the last episode was so corny. First of all, I hate big CGI battles of carbon copy superheroes and villains basically doing the same thing in different colors. It was awful and just looked awful. Plus, they had to force these sky fights. I've gone on record saying how much I love those weighted hand-to-hand grounded fights, and let me be honest, these dumb sky battles are exactly the opposite. When you take two carbon copy characters and throw them in the sky, it just accumulates in these unweighted attacks that I can't relate to, and it makes for these bland fights where we don't see characters having to use their own personal arsenal in creative ways. It's just the worst, and I swear the show was doing so good up until this point. And don't even get me started on the sword villain guy. I don't even know his name, but he might possibly be the worst Marvel villain so far. He sucks. His motives suck, he's boring, and just feels overall forced into the story. We did not need another villain on top of the crappy big bad villain that we already didn't really need. Man, the end of this show is a mess. And where did all these lame jokes come in from? I get that the show was never the funniest, but dude, towards the end, these jokes felt like something I would find in a Disney Channel original movie. Seriously, these jokes come out of nowhere, and it's such a different feel than what we had for the rest of the show and what was previously established. And even the whole sword side story as a whole became a stereotypical mess, because at the beginning of the show, I thought it was really cool, and it allowed for the viewer to have this sort of outside lens into the world. But as time progressed, just like the show itself, it all started to fall apart. I will say, however, that the ending was actually good. The music swelling while she had to say goodbye to Vision and the family she fabricated was some good stuff. And while we are on the topic of spoiler material, let's talk about the end credit scenes. First of all, I like the end credit scene with Monica being contacted by Captain Marvel. It's a cool setup, and like I stated before, I like the tie-ins. And the second credit scene was very cool too, but it brings up even more questions. Because we hear the voices of the children, so that begs the question of, do they still live on inside of her? Like a sort of mental sub-dimension in a way? Like, it's things like this that the show does and excels at, bringing up ideas and making you think and create your own theories. Just wish the show itself did more with what it set up. Now, this concludes our spoiler section, so we should have everyone back now. Personally, I want to go over some more of the positives I liked about the show, because in the spoiler section, I got kind of negative and voiced a lot of my issues, which I'll go over again later, but with no spoilers. But I enjoyed the switch of the sitcoms from the 50s to 60s to 70s to the 90s and so on. I enjoyed the changes and love to see the show parody the styles in a sense. I also love the tie-ins into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It always seems to be a given with Marvel, but is done so well and used in a way to further explain characters and motives, exactly how a multiverse should be. I especially love the tie-ins with Captain Marvel. I am the first to admit that it is definitely not the best Marvel movie, and looking back, I have no idea why I rated it so high, but it was fun to see the movie given a little love and have some callbacks, if you can fit the pieces together. We also finally got an actual backstory for Wanda and Pedro, so that was absolutely great. But being honest, this is the most unsettling idea in a Marvel project, and it had so much potential too. I even saw it in the first half of the show, because the show tries to hook you with these theories and cliffhangers but goes absolutely nowhere with them, and at best fumbles the idea setup. And it all culminates in a really lackluster, overdone, and cliche ending that makes you realize just how much they wasted certain potential of this show. Because this show almost feels like two different shows, and they seem to contrast so much that I understand why this show has become so polarizing. but the show itself is still solid. I do think it's at its best at the beginning, and a lot of the issues arise towards the end, and because of this, the score is a lot lower than I initially thought it would be. So WandaVision gets a 7.5 out of 10. It's still really enjoyable, but I can't help but feel Marvel really missed out on a lot of opportunities. I'm gonna be honest because I always am, but I wasn't really all that interested in Marvel after Endgame. I had my doubts about returning to the franchise, but I feel like this break was very well needed, and as much as I complained about WandaVision, it was a really good entry back into the world, and I'm starting to realize that if the content is spaced out well enough, I won't really ever get tired of this sort of thing if it's done right, and going forward it may not have the same effect the originals had building up to Endgame, but I'm excited to see where Marvel goes and how they handle it. But hopefully you enjoyed the video. Also, look at this graph. Okay, but as always, stay awesome, too awesome. Thanks for watching.